Gosh, it is good to see you, everyone. My name is Chris Albrecht. This is an OpenWater webinar today about the future, the present and future state of television. And there really isn't anybody better in the business to talk to than my guest today. He's a former colleague of mine from GigaOM, and he now runs the Lowpass newsletter, which is a must-read if you are in the TV or even just the entertainment business, because it covers not just TV, but also mixed reality, augmented reality, all kinds of stuff. His name is Janko Roettgers, and Janko, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Awesome. All right. Well, let me go ahead. Like I kind of introduced you, but tell us a little bit about what you cover at Lowpass, what Lowpass is, and sort of areas of coverage for you.
I mean, you sort of outlined it pretty well already. I've always been interested in the intersection of technology and entertainment. Been covering this now for a number of years. We started together, or we worked together for a while at GigaOM. You were actually behind the camera for some of my first video experiments there. Fun times. But afterwards, I was at Variety for a while, sort of diving more deeply into the entertainment industry there a little bit, also with a tech background. Then I was at Protocol, sort of continued that beat, but also took on more deeper dives into augmented reality, virtual reality, all those fun things with headsets. Also trying to figure out what's the next thing after the smartphone that everybody's vying for, the next platform. What is that? Is it smart speakers? Is it headsets? Is it glasses? Is it AI wearables? Something everybody's interested in these days. So I'm exploring all these things, but with the lens focused on entertainment and technology. And I'm continuing this now at Lowpass, which is my own independently run newsletter. It's sort of like a Substack. It's on a different platform, but kind of works like that. There's a free tier, there's a paid tier where you get a little bit of more extra stories every week and so forth. Yeah, it's fun. I have 18,000 subscribers around there somewhere, going up and down a little bit all the time, obviously. But yeah, it's been fun. It's been about a year since I launched a newsletter, and it's been going well.
Legitimate there, 18,000. Wow, that's great. So, it's funny when you and I worked together, that was in the late aughts, right? And YouTube was just happening, was just starting, right? Lazy Sunday kind of spurred that virality into the behemoth it is today. But back then it was really easy to kind of say, this is streaming video and this is television, right? Like they lived in two very distinct buckets. But now it's all kind of blurred. Do you have a sense, what do you consider television right now?
It's a really good question. It's almost like you're talking about very different parts of it, right? So there's television as in the TV that you have in your living room that sort of defines viewing behaviors too. A lot of viewing still happens on the big TV or on the big screen in your house. And a lot of that is longer form stuff. So these days, for people, it might be Netflix, it might be other stream programming. It may still be cable for a subset of the audience that generally is a little older and maybe hasn't changed that yet or is comfortable with that mode of viewing. But quite honestly, a lot of TV viewing on this big screen also is YouTube and there's other short form content. There was data from Nielsen out just about a couple weeks ago, looking at one of the recent months in TV viewing, and YouTube proper, so not their TV service, but YouTube proper, has an audience that is as big as Hulu and HBO Max, or Max as it's called now, and Disney Plus combined, basically. That's how much YouTube is being viewed on the big screen.
Yeah.
And so you have that. That's changing rapidly what's happening on these devices. You still have, you and I and people our generation still have an idea of what TV is based on the content. And we generally probably think about longer form content. But I would argue that's changing too. Then finally, what's actually happening on all screens, just like people spending hours of their day with programming. And I think if you look at it like that, with that lens, everything is TV. Like TikTok is TV, Instagram is TV, YouTube definitely, but also Netflix, also cable, also legacy, linear programming.
Yeah, I think it's, I think about my son who's 13, right? And so has grown up at a very different age of television, like you said, right? He will watch YouTube on our TV, but then also just spends just a ton of time just like flipping through YouTube shorts, right? And, or, obviously there's TikTok and Instagram reels. And
Yeah.
so it's just undergoing such a dramatic, like, Shift is even like too small a word, I feel like. Do you think that we have, I mean, I guess there's no going back at this point, right? Like there's just content everywhere. Or
Yeah,
am I reducing that too much?
I think so. And even when we started back in the days, it was sort of people try to always make this distinction of saying, "Oh, YouTube, that's cat videos,"
Yeah.
and but there's proper television or
Yeah.
whatever that meant. And even then, it became clear that that line was very blurry, right? Because people would do long form stuff on YouTube. At the same time, TV was doing, reality shows and all kinds of stuff that maybe were more closer to what's happening on streaming or on YouTube or whatever, or more feeding into those sentiments anyway. And maybe the modern version of that is TikTok, or maybe the modern version of that is Shorts, right? I think it is a very blurry area, and really, you have to say everything is television.
Everything is TV. Uh, what is something? So you are you're in what we call in the business the trade publication, right? So you are, you appeal to consumers because you provide news, but you're also writing about like the business of
Right.
media. And what's something that that people might not know about the TV business or the business of TV that you think they should?
I think one thing that isn't really clear to people, but if you look a little closer, it should be clear, is how much even the role of the TV maker has changed. The people who are the companies that make those TV sets that you buy at Costco and Best Buy or
Like
whatever.
the screens
The
that were
physical screens and how much
yeah.
their business has changed just over the last 5, 10 years. Because when you go to a Costco now, when you go to Best Buy, any of those stores, Walmart, you can walk in there. There's a TV right, at the entrance at Costco, probably 50, 60-inch TV for $300, $400, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And when you think back 5 years ago, the same size would have cost you maybe $900. 10 years
Yeah.
ago, it would have been $5,000.
Yeah.
So those prices have cratered, and it's unlike any other consumer electronics product, I would argue. If you think back on phones, like the iPhone hasn't been around that long. The first iPhone was what, $350, $400.
Yeah.
Now you pay $800, $900 for a phone. Obviously, they're a lot better, they're bigger screens and whatnot. But TVs have gotten a lot better too. The picture quality has gotten a lot better. The screens are bigger. At the same time, the prices have really compressed. And just over the last 2, 3 years, they've really cratered. And that has also led to TV makers just changing the way they make money. If you look at some of the publicly traded companies in this space, so Roku, Vizio, and if you look at their quarterly reports or their earnings reports, they do not make any money with hardware anymore.
Hmm.
In good years, maybe they break even on hardware. In bad years, they basically subsidize every TV that is selling to you
Hmm.
for this $300. What instead they're making money with is advertising and services, and primarily advertising. So anytime an ad runs on any of the services or most of the services on a Roku TV, Roku gets a cut. So that's what they're making money with these days. And that has shifted sort of the incentives. That has shifted also what kind of apps you see on these TVs. That has shifted kind of like the business models a lot, I think. And one of the most obvious examples is whether you buy an expensive TV like a Samsung or premium TV like a Samsung, or if you buy a cheap Roku TV, one of the first things you see when you turn them on these days is hundreds and hundreds of free channels that
Yeah.
kind of feel and look like basic cable back in the day, right?
Yeah.
It's linear, you can channel surf. Some of them are pretty crappy. Some of them are fairly reasonably well, and reruns of older shows that people like to watch. And all of them are made available for free these days. You don't have to buy into that with a cable bundle anymore. You get all of these hundreds of channels for free on a Samsung TV or an LG TV, any of them. But they're all obviously bringing in money with advertising.
Yeah.
And that's where the money is for any of these companies. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a Vizio that makes really affordable, cheap TVs, or whether you're talking about a Samsung where you pay more, but then the quality is also better and the hardware costs for them are higher.
Yeah.
They're all making money with advertising.
I'm going to ask you to flip up your collar there. Your microphone is
Oh,
rubbing up
am
against
I?
your zipper.
Sure.
Yeah,
I
that's
can also,
okay. That's
you know
okay.
what?
Yeah.
Let me just flip here a little
I just
bit
want
and
people to be able to hear you. Yeah, there we
yeah,
go. You
yeah,
get a webinar and a show. Well, I think it's interesting because something just popped up on my LG TV, which was a privacy agreement. And it was all related to, I don't even use the smart features of the TV. I use an Apple TV, but it was weird to see it pop up and like, do you agree to this? Private. And I was like, wait, well, hold on. Well, I'm not agreeing with this, right? And it was to your point, right? Like about the way that they advertise and how I'm using the TV and what data is shared. And I think that that's such a different, like, for me growing up, there was the on and off button, right? And then, I'm old enough to have a knob where I had to chunk, 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 chunk,
yeah.
chunk through UHF and VHF. But that is something that people probably aren't even aware of, right? Like, why would you think that you need a privacy agreement to operate your TV?
I think we're starting to become more aware of it because these companies are getting more aggressive about it. So there was a case that got actually some headlines a couple, maybe it was a month or two ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. But Roku sent out, they had new terms. And basically, people had to agree to their new arbitration terms right on their TV sets. And if you didn't, then the TV wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And some people like you who have hooked up a third-party device to it didn't even have their original remote control anymore. So they were sitting there and were like, how can I now get back to my Apple TV without having
Yeah.
to agree to these like privacy terms here, to these arbitration terms? So these companies, as their business model are changing, are getting more aggressive about these things. And then suddenly we're like, wait a minute, why is LG interested in what I'm viewing, right? Or
Yeah.
why is Roku asking me to agree to give up all my rights for class action lawsuits? I just want to watch TV.
I just, yeah, that's exactly right. I just want to watch the NBA. Why do I have to go through? Why do I need a lawyer in the room
Exactly. Yes,
before
yes,
I can
yes.
tune into the playoffs? So it's interesting that you talk about you're talking about sort of the free channels that come up where you can sit and watch, and I think they're called fast, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Free ad-supported streaming television, fast.
yeah, there
Yep.
it is. Free ad supporting. And so it's weird to think about when we went from cable, which was bundled, and everybody hated the cable company. And then when they could cut the cord, they're like, oh, look at this. I can just pick and choose what I want. But now, between sort of what you're talking about, these bundling of the fast channels that are on menus, or even Disney and Hulu and ESPN bundling, and then other services that are probably going to be bundled into that, what is the state of just channels and how the mechanisms through which you watch a show, and where do you think it's headed?
I mean, people make this argument that it's starting to look like old school television with these bundles. I sort of don't buy into that as much because I think the way the role of the consumer and the options of the consumer are still very different. So yes, you can buy a Disney bundle that has ESPN and Hulu and Disney Plus in it, and these companies obviously do that because it's their subscription businesses. And if you subscribe to more things at the same time, you're less likely to cancel them. So if you don't watch ESPN for a couple of months because whatever season is over, you have to wait until next fall or whatnot. As you can tell, I'm very versed in sports ball analogies. But so these bundles help with churn. That's the business reason for the industry. For the consumer, this means that you get stuff cheaper in these bundles. That's how they incentivize you to subscribe to them. But it's still not the same thing in my mind as the old school cable bundle because really back in the day, you didn't have any other choice.
Yeah.
If you wanted HBO, you had to get like the basic max super bundle with 500 channels.
Yeah.
That was $40 for a year, and then suddenly it was $150, and you kind of had to get over the sticker shock. And
Yeah.
but you didn't really have any other choice to get to like that one sports channel you want to watch in HBO.
Yeah.
These days, there is a bundle that has ESPN and Disney and whatnot in it, but you can also subscribe to them differently. You can subscribe to them probably on another platform, on your Amazon Fire TV or whatnot.
Yeah.
There's different types of bundles. Sometimes there's music thrown into something. You can get, I don't know, for a while you could get Spotify and Hulu together for cheaper and all these things. It's complex and complicated, but at the same time, you still have the ability to basically get everything a la carte and cancel and flip back and forth. So the consumer is in a much more powerful position these days, I would say.
Right.
And
And then
yes,
you're
there
not
is some
like,
bundling, but Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not like you're on the phone with the cable operator, like I need to cancel my subscription. You can pretty much just do it online anymore.
Right, right, right.
So they do have that ability. I saw this stat on CNET that said that 50% of Gen Z watch shows on their phone. So this gets back to sort of the TV maker thing that you were talking about earlier, sort of the quandary or conundrum that they're in. How do you think that is shaping the TV business right now? Is that why they're switching to all of these sort of privacy agreements and ad services, or how do you see that playing out?
I mean, I think it is definitely happening, mobile viewing, but I think it's more, it in a way, all of it is happening at the same time, right? So people are still buying TV sets. People are still watching stuff on the bigger screen. People are also watching a lot of content on the smaller screen. And I think these changes are more gradual, actually. So on the one
Hmm.
hand, yes, what we talked about, there's a lot more time spent on YouTube. There's a lot more time spent on TikTok, all the services that are not, especially the social like TikTok and Instagram and so forth, don't really have that big of a presence on TVs yet. There are some TV sets that have apps, but they haven't quite figured out how to make those things work. The curation and the experience is very different because you can't easily swipe through stuff with your remote control. So that changes things a little bit. But I think there's some smaller things that even like that people in that age group like to watch stuff with subtitles all the freaking time. So
Yeah.
I watch things with my family, and my kids turn on, Saturday night movie night, and they turn on subtitles. I'm like, why? It's just like how they watch stuff, because they watch stuff on their tablets and phones and with subtitles on all the time. And sometimes they don't have audio, and sometimes they do, but they do other stuff in the background, so it's easier to like, when you catch a quick glance of the screen, you catch the caption and so forth. So I think there's some more subtle stuff, and what that ultimately means for the business is still a really open question. I would say it helps international shows,
Yeah.
and you could see Netflix being really successful with Korean content and so forth. Some of this obviously has to do with the shows and just the quality of those shows. But I think also like if audio isn't as important anymore, if everybody gets trained to watch things with subtitles anyway, it doesn't matter as much whether they speak in a different language or whether it's dubbed or
Yeah.
not dubbed. Once you have a subtitle on, it's all just, video that you can watch.
Huh. And so I want to, I don't know how, are you talking with a lot of creators? Like I know that you're sort of on the businessy end, right? So it's Hulu rather than like a showrunner. But I
Right,
don't
right, right.
know if you are talking with sort of independent creators anymore and if they are changing how they are shooting or creating content for sort of this different generation of audiences.
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a really good answer to that. I mean, again, those shifts are gradual, and they're
Hmm.
also it's also a really messy time. And that's why anybody ever who claims they have an answer on how the next generation is going to watch television is going to end up making Quibi. That's going to bomb, right? Because this idea that you can take this old school mindset of, oh, we're going to have a studio, and we have going to have billions of dollars and invest that in content that is made for this audience, but with all these builds, bells and whistles,
Yeah.
um, it just doesn't work like that. So I don't know if I have a really good answer on like how production shifts. There's some interesting stuff. I mean, if you read like Taylor Lawrence wrote a really interesting article a while back on like how YouTube was hyper engineered for attention for a while, and all these shows have this really fast cuts all the time, and everybody
Yeah.
has these really loud thumbnails, and now there's a pullback from that again. So there's some stuff happening for sure, but it's that's almost separate from the way Hollywood does stuff, right? And even independent creators working more for traditional TV work. So I don't know if those changes have influenced that world yet as much.
Well, it's so funny, you say things like fast cuts and all that. Like they were saying that decades ago when MTV came on, right? And they're like, "Oh, it's MTV style editing," which just meant
Right,
that there
right,
were a
right.
lot of cuts, right? Like some things never change, or the more things change, the more they stay the same.
True.
So I think something that is talked about a lot, right, is this idea around discoverability that in a pool of infinite content, finding content or surfacing content that you want to see is a really tough problem, especially for creators that don't have the ability to market with hundreds of millions of dollars. Do you think, how big an issue do you think this is? And do you think it's something that needs to be solved per se, or can it be solved?
I think it is definitely an issue, and it's kind of gotten worse too. So the what I described with the changing role of TV makers who don't make money with hardware anymore, but now make money with services and ads, that has also led to everybody wanting to be that default platform, that homepage, that place where you go and find things, because that's how they can monetize these things further. So if you turn on your Fire TV and half of the stuff on the front page is recommendations for services you don't subscribe to yet, obviously they want you to subscribe to on the spot and then get a small cut, like
Yeah.
through their channel store. And Roku has the same thing, and all these services. That has also led to this really messy area where then you search for a show and they show you like 10 ways to get it, but really these 10 ways are all aggregators that then point you to the one way where the show actually lives. And it's kind of frustrating. It's
Yeah.
I wrote a story actually about this like a while back, I think 2 years ago now, and I called it "The Future of TV is Chaos and Confusion," because it really is like everybody is trying to reinvent this wheel around discovery because they want to be the ones that help you with it because they can then make monetize that again, and it has really made this process more difficult. I almost feel like it led to a good idea of aggregating all these things getting so messed up that people now are like, well, I really just want to go straight to Netflix or I want to go
Yeah.
straight to Disney and find some things in that app. That's good for Netflix, obviously. It's not as good for some of the other services that don't have as big of an audience and as big of usage.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's still an unsolved problem. I think it could get interesting once people figure out how to use some other things that have worked well on the internet. So, community recommendations, all those things like Spotify lives, obviously, Spotify is great because they generate like the weekly playlist for you, like
Yeah.
personalization is a
Yeah.
big part of it, but also being able to follow people and being able to subscribe to playlists and all those things have a really high value for finding things on Spotify, right?
Yeah.
And I think the same could work in video and with TV shows in particular, where if you subscribe to tastemakers, if you follow certain people, they could really help you find more interesting stuff.
Hmm.
And there's some companies are working on some parts of that. I know I talked to the folks at Plex for recently. They started to have some community features and they want to build that out where you can have then sort of public recommendations, public playlists. I think that could get interesting and also could help with a lot of the discovery. But yeah, it's still a very messy area. And if I can throw a plug in here,
Yeah.
our former colleague Liz Shannon Miller,
Oh,
if you
yeah.
remember her, so
Yeah.
she now writes a weekly newsletter that deals with discovery actually by just recommending stuff to watch, and it's great. So you should
Well,
it's called it's so she works at Consequence, and her newsletter is called uh, something I'm blanking out on
yeah,
right now,
that's all
which
right.
is terrible. But yeah, Stream On. Yes,
Stream
it's
On. That's
Stream
right.
On. So
Liz
subscribe to
Shannon
that.
Miller's Stream On.
Exactly. Subscribe to that, and you're gonna get a couple of recommendations every Friday for what to watch on the weekend.
Yeah.
So that's a fun way of doing it too.
Well, so this kind of plays into my next question, which is like, how do you see AI impacting the TV business?
It's a really good question. I think people are because in every aspect of the AI discussion right now, people say AI and they mean generative AI, right?
Yeah.
So everything else that has happened with AI for years and years when it comes to content recommendation, just the stuff that we just talked, like filtering and all these things, it's all AI driven, right? And has already changed the way the TV business works. So the fact that Netflix recommends you so many shows that are geared towards your interests and seems to be fairly good at it actually, um, it's all based on AI, right? So it has already changed that part of the business. When it comes to generating content, so generative AI, I think the changes are going to be slower than people expect. So we all look at Sora, we all look at these things. It's like it's capable of doing films now. We
Yeah.
never need directors or
Yeah.
crews again, right?
Yeah.
But not really. Um, and if it even if it was, the stories wouldn't be great. So it would take quite a while until it changes those parts of that industry. I think a lot of the things are going to be more subtle. So I wrote a story about a startup called Haystack. It's
Uh-huh.
a news aggregator that has a TV app on a variety of devices. So you can have like personalized news feeds, local news programming. Um, and they started to use AI to do local weather reports, right? Because local news stations have obviously maybe two, three times a day an updated weather report with somebody, an anchor in the studio telling
Sure.
you like when the rain is coming.
Yeah.
But weather can change hour by hour, and weather can change. You know, you used to live in the Bay Area, and now you live in the outskirts, like further up north.
Yeah.
Uh, when you get the news, when you live in the Bay Area and you get the San Francisco news, you know that even half of San Francisco is going to have different weather than what's in
That's
that
right. Yeah.
forecast.
Are you
And
talking to Mission or are you talking Marina? Right.
exactly. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
surrounding area, it's completely different
Yes.
all over again. So
Pacifica or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Like hyper local stuff. So they're using AI for that because they're just getting local data, and so they're generating a new report every hour with infographics, with forecasts, and
Hmm.
all those things, and then injecting that into these personalized news streams of people living in those hyper local areas. That's, I think, an interesting example, and it's not, you don't need like synthetic anchors for that. You don't need
Right.
generate complicated scripted sequences and crazy videos, but it's a subtle use of AI that has practical application that actually makes sense for people, and it augments all the other stuff that's already there, because once a day you probably do want that anchor that actually explains why stuff is happening, but in between you get these updates and they're AI generated. And I could see that happen in other contexts of well as well. When it comes to news coverage, when it comes to even some types of entertainment, right? So I think the changes are going to be more subtle, but definitely is impacting large parts of the business.
That's interesting too, because the weather, you think about just things that are data driven, right?
Yeah,
So the weather
exactly.
is like it is this number of degrees and it is this windy, and you can sort of compile all of that
Yeah.
into and present it to you in a way that's not just looking at your phone, but might have more, like you said, more context for your specific neighborhood. That's interesting. I want to sort of branch out a little bit now. AI was sort of our gateway into this other area that you cover, which is VR and AR. And what is your realistic take on its current form and its future? So we might need to narrow that down a bit, right? Because VR and AR are very different things. So VR is a little more like glitzy, glamorous, I guess. It's less about working in a factory and getting specs brought up as you look at a device. But so tell me, like, there's a lot of talk back and forth. What do Apple Vision Pro obviously launched, and that spawned its own discussion. But where are you sort of seeing the VR world right now net out?
Actually, I think it's in a fairly good place. People were uh, there was a hype a bunch of years ago, and then people were disillusioned by it. And then Meta brought the Quest out as a standalone headset, followed up by the Quest 2, which was more affordable, did more stuff. But they also, as they started to zero in on these devices, they zeroed in on the use case of gaming.
Hmm.
Before they tried all kinds of stuff, also narrative storytelling, that was always kind of hard to monetize. There were all kinds of scenarios around work and enterprise use and so forth, but that also turns out to be hard because companies have very specific use cases, and bringing new devices into those contexts is always hard. So entertainment and specifically gaming seemed to just work. They sold it's actually a relatively old number. They haven't actually ever said how many devices they sold, but I think it was reported in late 22, if I don't get that wrong now, that they had sold around 20 million devices, 20 million
Mm.
headsets of the Quest.
Hmm.
Since then, the Quest 3 came out, which also somehow propelled the 2 as a cheaper alternative again. So they have probably sold a bunch more millions. And they're starting to get some use where game makers can make tens of millions of dollars with these titles. It's still a relatively small industry, especially when you compare it to, consoles or PC gaming,
Yeah.
or obviously mobile, which, billions of mobile gamers, that's hard to
Yeah.
beat with anything. But we're starting to get there. I think there's starting to be like an ecosystem where people make real money. These titles are seeing a real audience. These devices are starting to get more traction. And now the question is like, how does it change once you add other capabilities or other use cases to it? So fitness as a use case, mixed reality pass-through, which the Vision Pro does, but also now the Quest 3 does, so where you can see your environment, which is
Yeah.
sort of like AR, but done slightly differently on a technical level. I think there's interesting applications for all of that as well. But we're still fairly early when it comes to that. And I think just this week there was reports that Apple sort of corrected their expectations for the Vision Pro. They may not ship as many devices as they thought because it's slower than they expected.
Yeah.
And I think the latest number, reported number, and that's again, Apple wouldn't comment on that, but the reported number is that they expect to ship 400,000 devices in the
Wow.
first year.
Yeah.
Not that much for Apple, obviously, but it's a $3,500 device that primarily, even though it's not marketed as that, still sort of gears towards developers.
Yeah.
Um, so again, it's still very early. But yeah, I see some momentum there, and people have been ignoring it, that segment, because like when you look 5 years back, it just didn't look very
Right.
promising. But I think we're at a very different state now, and we're seeing some users, we're seeing some momentum, and it can only go up.
Awesome. I look forward to that. For me, the Vision Pro thing is interesting because now I'm like, what's the delta going to be between version 1 and version 2? And when would version 2 come out, right? Like, how much entertainment would I get over the next 10 months, right? If they released another version next year that's smaller, better, faster, all of the things, right? And would I get $4,000 worth of entertainment value out of it before Gen 2 comes out? I don't,
Right, right, right.
you know,
It's hard, and I wonder how much they also, because they put out these devices with all the bells and whistles, like the eyesight outward facing display
yeah,
that people have made some fun of
yeah,
because it doesn't seem to do as much. But it's like once you add all these things, like how much can you pull back from it and say, no, actually you don't need that, and a version that is like less than 2,000 is just fine. Or how much do they have to like keep incorporating these things in the future?
Well, I
It'll
mean,
be
this is
tough.
the same company. You remember the Nano, not even the Nano, right? Like they had all the iPods with like, oh, it's got a color screen and a jog wheel. And then they're like, well, actually, this one is just a button.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah,
I
that's
mean? Like
that's true. That's
it's
true.
just a USB stick with a button. You don't need a screen. Here's one.
That's true.
Uh, so
I'm
yeah,
looking forward to the screenless VR headset. Yeah, that would be.
All right. Well, before I let you go, I want to, I've known you for a long time. I've known you as a journalist for a long time. And I want to know what you've learned from running Lowpass over this last year. This is your own paid newsletter. We're going to offer a subscription to OpenWater members at a discount. So that'll be in the show notes for that. But what have you sort of learned being on your own and running a paid newsletter news service?
Well, first of all, it takes longer than you think to sort of establish it. I started off with a significant base actually when I launched the business. So I had done a newsletter at Protocol, my prior job, the
Uh-huh.
publication I was with most recently. And when they folded at the end of 22, I spent some time negotiating and then ultimately buying that list from
Hmm.
them. So I didn't start with zero. I think that would have been a lot harder if I had tried to grow to 20,000 or 18,000 subscribers starting from zero. Having that base definitely was helpful. Um, even so, when you go into this and you look at some of the talk around independent newsletter businesses that kind of bubbled up 2, 3 years ago when Substack was sort of really on the up and up, uh, they were putting out numbers where like, oh, if you have 20,000 subscribers, 5% are going to pay.
Yeah.
No problem. And you run those numbers, and you're like, oh, that's actually a pretty good business. I could live with that.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that those numbers aren't really true. Or maybe for some people they are, but in the vast majority, I think people had much lower numbers. And same for me. So I have since also started to doing some sponsorships, also go into that route to offer free subscribers something, but also monetize the free subscribers. Learned that you have to have sort of multiple revenue streams to make a business like this work. Also learned to be patient and grow it slow over time. And one thing that I really didn't expect, as somebody who has always been supported by others when it comes to sort of the operational stuff, I had other people sign my check, I had other people deal with all these things. Like the amount of time that I spent with people having issues with their credit card
Oh,
or
wow.
with their spam filters or all
Yeah.
those things, I don't mind doing it. I actually like the chance, being able to talk to people and actually, not being like this anonymous thing or an anonymous operator, but actually like being able to help people feels good. But I didn't expect that I had to do it quite as often.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, as someone who also briefly ran his own newsletter, there's the stuff that no one tells you about. You're like, oh,
Yep.
wow. It was a lot easier when there was a company running all of this stuff.
Yep. Yep.
Well, Janko, this has been great. It's been great to reconnect. It's also been great to learn about the state and future of the television business. Thank you so much. If people want to find you or Lowpass, where should they go?
It's super easy. It's lowpass.cc. So LOWPASS.cc. And yeah, you can find everything there.
That's great. Janko Roettgers is the founder and writer, and as we just learned, customer service agent and everything else for Lowpass, a must read. Again, it's a must read newsletter if you are in the media business. Janko, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.